Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. I would like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. The webinar that we are presenting today will be on reviewing and preparing a schedule narrative report for a client. One of our senior application consultants, Bill Ocharzak, or Bill O as we refer to him, will be your presenter today. Before we turn the presentation over to Bill, we have a couple of housekeeping items that we'd like to go over first and foremost. If you've noticed, all of the call-in phones are automatically muted. This allows us to preserve the quality of the audio for all of our attendees as well as our presenter. If at any time you have any questions that you would like to ask, there is a questions box in your GoToWebinar screen. You can submit your questions, and time permitting, we will try to answer as many as possible. Upon completion of today's webinar, we will put together a follow-up email. Everybody who registered and or attended today's webinar will receive this email follow-up. In the follow-up email, you will receive a link to the recording of the webinar that you can share with your colleagues, a copy of the presentation that Bill will be showing today, along with a questions and answer box. Any questions that are submitted today or via email will be placed into this master file and answered, and we will send it to everybody. We are going to get started with today's webinar, and I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
All right, thanks, Dan. As Dan mentioned, Bill O is probably easier. Got a crazy long last name there, but so this is just our tool matrix, various products that we support for project controls. We do everything from training, implementation, from P6, Unifier, Aster Power Project, Acumen, Project Status, which is an in-house tool that our developer and programmers have made. If you have any questions of any of these tools, please feel free to email or call us, and we'd be more than happy to give you more information on all these tools. Products and services, like I just mentioned, we do everything from implementation to selling software to training. We have a hosting services company that have data centers all over the world, Australia, over in Europe, and a couple over here in the United States. Okay, so today's webinar, we're going to be talking about how to review a schedule. There's multiple different tools to use outside of P6, and then at the end of doing the analysis and running the report, we're going to submit that to the client. We get schedules at all various times. Sometimes we come in and work on a baseline schedule to create it. Most of the schedules I get with are halfway through the project life cycle, and they're various of a mess. It usually I got stuck with the difficult ones that take a lot of look and research to see what's going on. So we're going to talk about P6. We'll jump around some other tools, and then at the end we'll walk through that narrative that I prepare for the client. Okay, schedule matrix and what they tell us. What good project schedule should be providing. We'll be talking about all the tools for analyzing schedules, creating the report, sending it to the client, and then reviewing with the client. And then we'll have some summary, and then upcoming events, and then at the end, like Dan mentioned, we'll have questions if you have any. Okay, first off, when you meet with the client, what to request from the client. So obviously you want to request all the P6 files, baseline, current schedule. I've given sometimes just the baseline, sometimes only the current schedule. The next important thing is any schedule specification documents. Is it CPM, best or recommended practices? You're allowed to use lag, constraints, things like that. So get as much documentation as you can so you can get the clear picture of what the schedule is supposed to look like and what you're going to be reviewing to make sure that it checks off all those specifications in that document. And then when you're with the client, what are they looking for? a lot of times they just say the schedule's not good or it's a mess, and that's really all they know. Usually it's higher level management that we speak with, so they may not know the ins and outs and the fine details of P6 and all the terminology. So they may just know it's not working for them. Most of the time you got to kind of tell them what you can provide them, from my experience. So, and then how long will the schedule review and report take? I got burned on this early in my career here at McNatty, and just told them I could get it done in 3 days, and I didn't realize all the digging and information I had to look for. So make sure you get that file, spend some time getting an overall feel of what the schedule looks like, and make sure you don't answer that question until you actually know what you're getting yourself into. All right, so here are the tools that we'll be going through in this webinar. So we'll go through P6, Claim Digger, as you guys know, has been a part of Primavera for many years. In the newer versions that have come out, Claim Digger is now called Schedule Comparison. And then we'll also show you there's a check schedule in P6 EPPM if your P6 professional is connected to your EPPM database, or you're just using EPPM. There's a really nice 14-point check through that. And we'll go through Schedule Analyzer for the enterprise. There's a baseline checker, an update checker. That's an older product from Ron Winters that will go through that. Spits out some really good information. There's a tool called XER Toolkit. We'll go through that. And then Acumen Fuse, which you may or may not have heard of. We've done webinars in the past of that. So we'll go through what that tool is and show you what kind of output that tool can give you. The first and most important thing is when you do receive that file from the client, make sure you make a copy of that and review it against the original file, because they may not have run the schedule, or there may not be all the information refreshed, and if you just use that file and hit F9 and schedule it, you can compromise the integrity of the file that you're trying to review. So that's a very important lesson, to make sure you make a copy to compare it against the original file that the client sent you. All right, so this is something that kind of comes up more often. If you guys ever heard of POBS table data issue, if you ever import a file, and you can see in the screenshot here, it's importing this POBS table data, and it's taken forever. I've worked with clients that it's taken overnight to try to import one project. And the POBS stands for Performing Organizational Breakdown Structure. It was built in Primavera, and there was really never a use for it, but through importing and exporting and various other reasons, this data in your P6 database can build up, and it could drastically slow down your import process. There is a manual process that we have a tech tip on that shows you how to manually go in there and clean up the data in the database. And you can see in the snapshot here on the lower left, I have the before of the size of the file was 5 megabytes, and then after cleaning it up, it turned into 448 kilobytes. So drastically changed. It took over an hour before I cleaned up this table data, and then it was less than 30 seconds after I cleaned it up. So if you need more information about that, you can email us or ask a question. We'll share the link with you for that tech tip that we did back in November of 2015. All right, when you're reviewing the schedule, there's a bunch of questions to look for and think about. And you want to make sure you dive as deep into the schedule as possible. So activity IDs, do they mean anything, or are they just numbers? Usually if you pull up a P6 schedule and they're all numbers, chances are it was an import from Microsoft Project. So make sure you look at that. WBS in codes? Are they built to the specifications? Make sure you really go through that document, because you want to make sure that you give everything that you possibly can to the client to make sure that they can take that report and run with it and clean it up, or have us do it for them. Relationship types. What percent are finish to start? Finish to start is the default. Majority, 80–90% of your relationship should be this type of finish to start relationship. We'll go through the tools that will actually drill down and tell you what percentage are start to start, finish to finish. So it'll make it pretty easy for you to identify how your schedule is built and if you're using enough of the finish to start relationships. Constraints. Are you allowed to use constraints? Are you using too many constraints? We'll go through that. There's different ways to look at constraints and see how they impact the schedule. Open ends. You could do that with a simple log report when you hit F9 in schedule. Activity types. If you're not resource loading your schedule, I've seen it before where all the activities are resource dependent. It's not a big deal as long as you're not using resources and resource calendars, but if you're not using resources in your schedule, you should make sure it's task dependent. And these are just some of the initial questions. We'll dive a little deeper into what to look for and what to think about as we go along here. So first things I like to look at is activity descriptions. Are there blank descriptions that must be resolved? You could run filters that search for activity descriptions that may be duplicates. I have been in situations where there are top secret for Department of Justice or Defense where they have blank descriptions. So it is out there. And then duplicate activity descriptions. All descriptions should be unique. Duplicates can be confusing, especially if you're tracing logic or looking at your critical path and you see review and approval 4 or 5 different times and you have no idea what that review and approval means or what part of the schedule it is. So it may be generic in the beginning, and a lot of times we see that and just have to spend time figuring out how to make that specific in each work breakdown structure element to make sure when you're looking at the activity you know exactly what it is. And then substantial completion of an activity. Always look for substantial completion or similar milestones that denotes the end of the contract time period. Okay, activity durations. Organized by duration to identify long and short duration activities. So these are some of the things we want to look for. A high percentage of short durations could be too much detail based on your update period, depending on your organization and your industry. There's everything down to the hour. You can update daily, weekly, monthly. So based on that, you got to determine how much detail you need in your schedule. Physical work activities that exceed 2 months or 44 work days may be difficult to measure and progress and performance. Some specifications limit the duration of physical work activities, so make sure that when you do get that schedule specification document that you look through it and see a lot of times there are a certain range where activities cannot be, they have to be in a certain range, 10 to 20 days or 15 to 40, whatever it may be. So make sure that you identify that and look at all the durations to make sure that they are in compliance with that. Out of the box, Primavera has a default 5-day duration. So if you run through the schedule and you see a great deal of activities with 5-day durations, maybe they just built the schedule and didn't even put any thought into the durations, and so that's something to take a look for. Zero duration activities that are not milestones could be a concern. So those are another things you want to look for. Long durations and odd numbers, for example, 323 days may indicate a need for further investigation on how to number what was determined. Same is true for activities with similar rounded durations, 100, for example, 100 days. Durations may not have been completely defined. And then, of course, we want to be aware of the rolling wave of detail. A lot of times we see projects that have tons of detail in the beginning of the project, and then towards the end, the durations get longer and longer, and there's less detail, and it's harder to track the actual work effort and the risk of the schedule. All right, one of the first things I like to do when I do get a schedule is calendars seem to always be an issue, so that's one of the things I check first. Usually calendars are just created because they're not sure how to create them, or they created them incorrectly, or maybe they have imported a lot of Microsoft project files. There's no filter, so whatever's in Microsoft project, all that data comes in, everything from the resources, calendars, and you may end up importing all these calendars that you're not aware of and maybe assigned a wrong calendar. You may see 5 different standard 5-day work weeks, and in reality, if you dig into the schedule or the calendar, you may find that in reality that 5-day work week may not have actual 5-day work week, or maybe 7-day, but it was just labeled 5 days. So if you ever think there's any issues, I'd just start with the calendar. Just because some activities work on 10 hours and others work on 8, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to change the hours in the calendar. When an 8-hour activity hands off to a 10-hour activity, you end up with a fractional duration for the successor. So we could go into our edit user preferences, and I'll show you once we get through this where that is if you're not familiar with it. So you could turn on your fractional durations and your time units, so you can see exactly what, if they're whole durations. If you have, for example, on the first activity in the snapshot, we have Design Building Edition with 55.33 days. So we have, and then of course at the summary level at the top, you see we have 681.11 days. So that's an easy way to create a layout and run through your schedule to see why is an activity finishing at 9:36 a.m. and the next one starting at 7 p.m., something like that. So calendars are definitely the first step you want to take a look at to see, start investigating the schedule and see if there's any issues. Okay, so original versus remaining duration. You want to make sure that all the originals match the remaining duration, especially for future non-started work. I've seen schedules where the original duration is 20 and the remaining duration is 15 for a not started activity. Why that happens, who knows? It could be just user error. But those are some of the things you want to look for to make sure that the dates are actually properly being captured. So level of effort activity, this actually happened to me the other day. So if a level of effort activity is not capturing the correct dates, for example, in this snapshot here, I have a level of effort issue. I have a start to start as the predecessor, so we can see that January 4th is capturing the start date on my level of effort. And I have a finish to finish, submit 401 and 404 applications of January 2nd. But if you look at the finish column in my level of effort, it's shown December 29th. So I double checked to make sure it was a level of effort activity type. I removed the predecessor and successor to make sure that it was capturing the right thing. I checked my calendar, maybe there was a calendar issue, and it wouldn't work. I deleted the activity, and I added it back into the schedule and retied the logic, and I still couldn't get that date. And it turned out, after further investigation, that the activity of the successor to submit 401 and 404 applications, the original duration was 1, and the remaining duration was 0, so it wasn't capturing the right date. in that remaining duration. So it's really important to go through every small detail of the schedule, because that could throw off your dates. And if there's a lot of issues like this, you're going to get quite a different output than what the story should be telling you. All right, logic and lag review and your schedule specifications. Good recommended schedule practices that you should have no open ends except your start milestone and finish milestone. There's in the newer version, which in next month webinar we'll get into what's new in 16.1, and probably a lot of us schedulers have been waiting for something like this. In the new version, you can put these predecessor and successor detail columns, and it'll actually show you what the relationship type is and if there's any lag on the schedule. As these versions get upgraded, more and more cool features that will make our life a little easier as we start reviewing these schedules. So this is a nice new function that I think will be very useful for reviewing schedules and seeing how everything is flowing. So we want to make sure the client I'm working with right now is going to be public record, the schedule. So spelling is crucial. There is a spell check function in P6 that you want to make sure you run through every activity, because I know I don't want my name on something that has misspelled words over there, especially for the public. So I went through, I just did that about a month ago. I went through about 1,000 activity schedule and had to review every single activity to make sure it was spelled correctly, and I definitely found a lot of them once I adopted the schedule. So make sure it's spelled right. Activity IDs, as I mentioned briefly before, if you see numbers, most likely numbers are imported from Microsoft Project. We want them to be specific or unique, so they actually mean something. For example, in this snapshot over here, we got BAS, building related systems. So you can, when you're looking at your predecessors and successor details and you're tracing logic, you'll be able to actually tell and talk about why the activity is there, what it is, and things like that. I was in a meeting the other day, and we were reviewing the schedule with the client, and they wanted to know what P2K 3000 was and why it's in there, and it didn't make sense. But in reality, it was just a level of effort activity that was just capturing the amount of work effort in that phase. So make sure you spend some time and put some thought into making your activity IDs unique to make sure they mean something, and it'll help your schedule and help communicate what's actually going on when you're looking at different aspects of P6. And then activity type. The schedule I just adopted a couple months ago, everything was resource dependent. That could be from Microsoft Project import. The schedule that I'm working on does not have any resources included in the schedule. As I mentioned before, it's not going to impact the schedule because we have no resources or no calendars associated, or no resource calendars associated with it. But if you're not using resources, they should be task dependent. Make sure the schedule is clean and built the way it should be built. All right, constraints. Make sure when you put a constraint on the schedule, you actually know what the schedule impact will be. A lot of times I've reviewed schedules and there's just constraints all over the place just to satisfy dates, and the schedule's not built correctly. So also when you're looking at constraints, make sure you care about activities that completed a year ago. They have no impact on the schedule moving forward. So make sure you investigate to see if those constraints are future constraints or in progress constraints, because who cares about the activities that completed in the past, and that's going to have no impact. All right, I learned this lesson a long time ago as well when I did my first schedule review, and Do not just simply rely on the schedule log report. When you hit F9, there's a little log report that will show you project statistics, how many activities are in the schedule, how many activities with constraints, errors and warning section. It is definitely a good starting point, but as I mentioned with constraints, all these activities without predecessors, are they completed activities? You shouldn't have to worry about them. So it may say on the screenshot there's 508 activities, but just don't automatically reject the schedule or just think that it's going to be a problem, because if it's in the past, it will have no impact on your schedule. So just a good starting point, but you got to do a lot more digging to see what's actually causing the issues in the schedule. Okay, and I've seen this before. I've reviewed a client. A baseline schedule actually had 6 loops, circular loops in it. So obviously that schedule should have been rejected immediately and never been approved as an original baseline. But it does happen. I unfortunately think I indirectly got that guy fired after my review of the schedule, but this is 101 stuff that you should look for and identify and correct these mistakes. So that's something you got to correct immediately. Otherwise, it won't. Primavera won't let you run it forward and backward pass and schedule it. So that's got to be corrected before you move any further in the schedule review. Okay, and then we have in the newer version of P6 that just came out, instead of Claim Digger in the tools menu bar at the bottom, it's now schedule comparison. That's a part of Visualizer. So if you have an older version, you could use Claim Digger, and it's kind of got just a newer, cleaner look and feel in the schedule comparison tool. On the right-hand side here, you can see that we have create a new. We can create new from existing, or we can open existing. So you can create layouts and run those reports and save those reports. And then you'll notice, if you are familiar with Claim Digger, this is something that should look familiar to you. In the advanced settings in Claim Digger, you'll be able to see all this information. What do you want to compare? Obviously, if you have no costs or resource assignments in the schedule, if you've run this report and never checked any of these boxes, you'll know that you'll get a 50 to 60 page report. So that might be just too much information. So make sure you go into the advanced setting and take a look to see what you actually want to have an output out of. That way you're not filtering through and printing out 50, 60 pages of stuff. And just like you could in Claim Digger, you can save it to HTML, CSV, and print that out. And here's a snapshot of the report that comes out of the schedule comparison in Visualizer. If you noticed, if you're familiar with Claim Digger, you'll be able to see that this looks really familiar. So it gives you a lot of good statistics of your baseline against your current updated project. So that's a nice tool. So I'm going to jump into P6 and just show you some different layouts that I created, just so you can see that I always create custom layouts that makes my review process easier. That way I don't have 13 or 15 columns. I can go through each layout and walk through everything to make sure I'm following all the steps and making sure everything's properly reviewed. Okay, so I'm on release 16.1. It's the newest version Primavera came out with. So this is a layout for durations. So you got to literally go through each activity one by one, and that's why I said in the beginning, make sure you take a look at the schedule to see how big the schedule is, and do a kind of quick general health of the schedule to see how long it's going to take you. So don't cut yourself short. Make sure you give yourself enough time to do a thorough analysis of the schedule. So you'll notice in this original duration, it's a non-started activity. It's starting at 4 a.m., but the remaining duration is 5 days. So you're going to have to look to see why that remaining is 5 days. Was it originally 12.7 and now it's 5? You got to do some investigation and see exactly, communicate with the client or the scheduler to see why is this there, at least identify it and say your original and remaining duration of non-started activities is not matching. So they want to make sure you run through that. Okay, as I mentioned, in the new 16.1, they have predecessor and successor detail columns. So they also have the old predecessor and successor columns that you're used to seeing in the other versions, but now in the new update, they have the relationship type, and you can see there's lag on these schedules. So as these versions are updated and new features become available, we'll have easier ways to see if there's lag in the schedule, or if your relationship type's not correct. So something I think will be very useful, and I think a lot of you schedulers will like using that feature. So as I mentioned, I create all these different layouts. It just makes it easier to review and QA check the schedule. I pulled in my calendar column. As you can see, I have decimals turned on in my units, and I also have my time units on. And if you're not familiar where to do that, you go to Edit, User Preference, and you can show time, 12-hour, 24, or do not show time. And then your time units, you could turn on your decimals. And that's a real easy way to see if you have fractional durations. And then you see on the calendar column, you have standard column calendars, and then you have 7 times 24 calendars. So you want to investigate to see if those calendars are properly assigned, their fractional durations, and then go in there and investigate and try to figure out why you're having fractional durations. Okay, as I mentioned in the slide deck, that activity IDs, if they're in numbers, they should be probably coming over from Microsoft Project. So make sure you put some thought into it and have some unique activity IDs so they actually mean something when you're reviewing the schedule and tracing the activities in your logic. As I mentioned, there's a spell check. Obviously, that's not how you spell review, so you don't want to publish something with misspelled words. So make sure you use that spell check. And then I've also pulled in my activity type column. So if you're not using resources in your schedule, make sure you don't have any activity type as resource dependent. Make sure it's all task dependent, start milestone, finish milestone, or level of effort. Okay, so now we're going to jump into P6 EPPM. There is a schedule check function that is available, and it's a really neat tool. It's really useful. If you have your P6 Professional connected to your EPPM database, you can go in there and use this function, or if you're just using EPPM, this will be a good QA check to run a diagnostics test. It's a 14-point check that will see what your schedule quality is. So here's the report output. Your target percentage, you can manually change that percentage based on either industry recommended practices, or if there's schedule specifications that are in that document, you can set that target date accordingly, and it will run it against that percentage. And it'll give you the projects that you checked at top. It'll run through all the logic, negative lags, positive lags, and green is good, red is bad. So it'll give you an overall summary at the top here of all the issues that it found. And then down below here, you can drill deeper and actually find out what activities are causing issues. For example, we have open ends here. So we'll have to go in and look at those. As I mentioned before, open ends, the first milestone and the project finish completion milestone. So these are good, but we'd have to look at these two activities in the middle to see why they have no logic tied to them. And then we have relationships with positive lag duration. So this is really nice and easy. As you know, in the older versions, it's hard to identify and find lag. Lags are considered hidden activities. So you want to make sure, if you're using lag, make sure you know where it is. But now these new tools have come out. Makes it real easy to identify which activities have lag on it, instead of running through your predecessor and successor details tabs to see where the lag is. So then we have the majority of relationship types should be finished to start. So it gives you a percentage and the count. And then down below here, it gives you all the relationship types on each activity in the whole schedule. It goes through constraints, soft constraints, float. So as I mentioned, it's a 14-point check. It's a really useful tool to see the whole quality of your schedule. And this is something that if you haven't used before, I would recommend looking into it and using it. All right, so now we're going to go through the Schedule Analyzer for the Enterprise. It's a tool built by Ron Winters. If you're familiar with the scheduling world, he's been around forever, and it's a really useful tool that I like to use to do a baseline check, comparison against the original file, against my update. There's a calendar functionality in there. So there's a bunch of different functions in this tool that are very useful for reviewing schedules and comparing schedules. For example, this is a calendar output. It tells you last modified, your working days throughout the week. As a standard 5-day work week. You notice at the bottom here, it shows that there's no holidays associated with this. On my last client, when I reviewed the schedule, it had no holidays, and they decided to move forward with no holidays and adjust the duration accordingly, keeping in mind that there are holidays in there. And now I just was requested to change the calendar to 5 days, standard workday with holidays. And it took me like 2 days to make that change throughout the whole calendar. So the lesson there is make sure you set your calendar up properly in the first place. That way you don't have to spend all that extra time cleaning it up and making sure that dates didn't change or durations didn't change and things like that. So very useful tool. There's a baseline checker, as I mentioned. So it'll give you list of all the activity checks, and in a minute I'll jump into it and kind of show you what kind of output it gives. So very useful tool. And once it runs that log report, you can actually go into a different section and actually drill into all the issues, and it will show you what's going on with the schedule and actually tell you which activity it is, which successor, have there any activities been deleted or added. So very useful for reviewing the schedule. So this is the baseline checker. So you just select two schedules and run your report. And after you get your log report, you could actually drill into all of these warnings and errors that the schedule analyzer found. So it's a very useful tool. You can throw this into a Word document and send it to your client and say, our baseline had these amount of activities. Now in our new update, there were 15 activities deleted. Why were they deleted? So you want to make sure you look at this and see what's going on from your baseline to your current updated schedule. Constraints to deleted activities. So it goes through everything and really gets into all the fine detail of the schedule. So it's a very useful tool. I use it all the time. Okay, here's another tool that I've used a little bit, and it's very useful. And you could download it for free for 30 days, and might be something you want to look into. You can review Primavera and MS projects. You can import a whole database, or you can just import certain XER files. And if you notice, I kind of got an arrow going to clean the XER file POBS table data. So I personally haven't used that function, but if it works, it's going to save a ton of time. The manual process can be a little tricky, and if you grab too little or too much, it will make the file invalid. So that might be something that is very useful if you do have that POBS table data issue when you're importing. You might want to look into that. This tool's pretty useful. It has a schedule check. It will show your Gantt chart, all your activities, just kind of like a visualizer type view. Quality compliance, so it'll give you a QA check on all of your open ends, finish to start relationships, start to start relationships. Earned value, if you're using earned value, there's earned value analysis, which is pretty nice. And then there's a calendar function that will show you all the snapshots of the calendars that you use. So here's a snapshot of the quality check. So it gives you kind of a dashboard view of what's going on in the schedule. And you can drill into these, and it will actually pull out all the activities that are missing predecessors. So this is a useful tool that I'd like to show and use from time to time. We have a quality compliance. This is kind of like the 14-point check in EPPM. This will go through all the basically statistics and quality and health of your schedule, and it'll tell you a percentage of your float values, everything from unresourced tasks, late starting tasks. So it's a useful report, and might be something you want to look into if you haven't heard of this tool before. As I mentioned, there's a calendar view. You could pull up multiple calendars, or you could just review a standard one-day calendar, and you can see if you have any calendar issues. If there's certain days that have 8 hours or 4 hours, you can run through it and get a real quick view of the whole calendar instead of going into Primavera and going through each month tab by tab. So I find this useful, and it makes it a real easy, quick check of the schedule if there's any issues or any exceptions that shouldn't be in there, or any holidays that may not be a holiday. And as I mentioned, the Gantt chart view, it's similar to Visualizer. You could print this out, drill deeper into it, look at logic and relationships. So it has some nice functionality into it. Okay, and then I'm going to jump into Acumen. If you haven't seen Acumen before, we have done some webinars in the past on it. If you have any questions about that, you can call us, and we'd be more than happy to give you a demonstration in more detail than what I'm going to go into, or find about pricing or training and things like that. And real quickly, just to show you, this is what the XER tool kit. It's actually a tab out of Microsoft Project that's an add-on. So that's where you'd find it once you install it and download it. So as I mentioned, it's a useful tool. I like it, and It definitely helps when I'm reviewing schedules. Okay, so this is Acumen Fuse. As I mentioned, if you have any questions about this, please feel free to call us. You can review pretty much every schedule tool from Microsoft Project to Primavera, Phoenix Project Manager, Apta PowerPoint. So this is it's a great tool and accepts pretty much every scheduling tool out there. So this might be something you want to look into. So there's a diagnostics tab, and it runs through pretty much everything you could think of in the schedule. So when I'm looking at a schedule, my green line here is my data date. I want to make sure that I'm only looking at the activities in the future. As I mentioned before, if the activities are in the past, they're not impacting the schedule, they're already completed. Why should we investigate and spend time on there? But there are some instances where I was told that I know the schedule was started 2 years ago, and I had to actually go back and retie all the logic based on someone that new jumped on board, and they wanted a true CPM schedule with everything tied properly. So I had to spend the time and tie hundreds of activities that were completed, even though they had no impact on the schedule. So best practice would be to do that in the beginning, so you don't have to go back and do all that effort afterwards. And so you can drill into Acumen and look at all the leads, and it will tell you on the lower right side, it will actually give you the activity ID, the description, float values. So any ribbon you click on or any tab you click on, it'll show you all the activities that are causing issues. Obviously green's good, red's medium, and red's a high issue. So this is also a 14-point check, just like we did in EPPM. And there's all these tabs down below, and it'll allow you to specifically drill into certain issues. So we have everything from lags, constraints, floats, and it will give you everything based on the data date. And you could also add a baseline on here, so you could review 2 projects at once. So it's a great tool, and there's all kinds of good stuff to really dig down deep into your schedule and find out what's going on. So as you can see down below, there's baseline comparison, planned, in progress, earned value information. So a lot of really nice stuff for you. And there's a logic functionality here, so you can look at all of your relationships based on the relationship type, if you have lags or leads in your schedule, any redundancy index, out of sequence. So these are all good. The logic checks are really important, and it makes it really easy in this tool to look in there to see what's going on with your schedule and see where their issues are. There's a risk module. I know I'm running close to out of time, so I want to make sure that I get through the narrative and show you the final output and the report we send to the client. And then there's a dashboard view. This is a really nice view, and you can report out this information, and gives you really nice different dashboards that will tell you what's going on with your schedule. So I love using this tool. It's very helpful for me, and it's something you guys might want to look into if you haven't heard of it or haven't used it before. Okay, so who's going to be reviewing this report? Most of the time, the management comes to us and tells us they think they have issues in the schedule. They can't exactly tell you what the details are of the issues, but they know it's not a good working schedule. So as I mentioned earlier, they know the schedule may not be good, and they don't really know what they're looking for. So that's when you got to investigate and kind of tell them what you can provide for them. So management, of course, less detail, higher level summary. They may not know what open ends mean, or constraints, or leads, or lags. So you want to make sure you report on 2 different levels, one to the higher level management, and then if it's going back to a scheduler, you want to make sure it's very detailed, and obviously they'll understand the schedule language and be able to go in and correct all those mistakes. Okay, so here's a sample schedule report that we'll put together for the client. Make sure client name, phone number, contact information, who you're sending it to. So this first section is on the high level reporting to that management. So basically starts off with telling you what did we review. We reviewed standard industry best practices or recommended practices for CPM schedules, and then we go into a matrix, and then we go into kind of a issues and warnings section that indicates an analysis report. So for example, this is what we review with the management or senior level people, kind of telling them that all the main issues that we found, kind of high level, showing that there's 168 activities that had no successors. So if you're looking at your float values and you see a high number of float in the hundreds, 200s, 300s, that's a really clear indication that that activity has no successor and it's just using the project finish as its finish date. So you're going to have very high float values, so that's something to look for. Calendars, there's a bunch of calendar issues. There are multiple calendars. Are they needed? There are no holidays. As I mentioned before, that could be a mess, and my client learned the hard way that took a lot of time to clean up. Critical path, in this specific example, only 8 activities, less than 1% of the schedule. So clearly there was tons of constraints and open ends, and just wasn't built properly. So got to go investigate all those activities with those open ends and the high float values to figure out what's going on. So be careful when you're using lags and leads in a schedule. Lags are considered hidden constraints and can portray an unrealistic picture through the logic. So make sure if you're using lags, you know where they are, and recommended practices to kind of stay away from them. So, and then we give a quick summary. The schedule is incomplete. More time should be spent on the logic and actually generating a clear, accurate critical path. So, so based on the schedule, we'd be apprehensive in committing a completion date identified in the schedule. So here's a matrix report. It goes through our current original file, project finish date, must finish by date, are there any loops in the schedule, all the calendars being used, high float values. Obviously those must be open-ended successors, so they're just using the project finish. Low float, activities, total number of activities in progress. So just a real breakdown. This is more for the scheduler or the people that are going to be going to fix this, the project manager. All the constraints, what type of constraints are in the schedule. So we did a 38-point check on the schedule, so we can dig really deep and made sure that we found every issue possible. And then there's an analysis section that goes through the issues that we found and the recommendations that we have. So in this issue 1, no calendars, no holidays assigned to the calendar. So make sure you look for that and make sure you include all those standard state and federal holidays or your company holidays. Everything from the critical path, our start to finish relationships, they're very unusual, and there should be some justification in why you're using that. Open-ended predecessors and successors, recommended CPM practice, as we've mentioned, everything should be tied except that first milestone and then the completion milestone if you want a true CPM output, and actually track accurate float in your schedule. Out of sequence, why is it out of sequence? Obviously, certain things may change based on weather or issues or things backordered, so things may happen out of sequence, but make sure that you go in there and and revise that logic to make sure that your logic is actually correct. So, and then lags, like we mentioned, hidden constraints with no descriptions. Use them sparingly. If I think I need to use a lag, I just create an activity in its place so we could actually see it and actually track it. So that's how I use lags. I just create activities for them. And we'll show you one more. We got just about 3 or 4 minutes left. Okay, so same thing in the beginning here. Gives you just best practices, what we're reviewing, indicates the schedule variances, and then the analysis report. This example had 5 loops in the approved baseline schedule, so clearly the person that built the schedule had no idea what they were doing, because you can't run your schedule and your calculation if you have loops in your schedule. So this was quite a lot of work, this schedule, and took quite a while. It took a couple of weeks to review. It was a mess. But now you can see I compared the baseline against the current update. So we created all the variances. If there's any issues, we stated them in the far right column. Same thing, we did a 35-point check. This one's a little longer because there was more issues on it. And then same thing at the end, as I showed you in the last one, we give all the items and issues and kind of point out all the things that they need to go investigate and look at so they can clean the schedule up and actually have a real functioning, good working schedule that reflects actual work that's being done. And then again, this is the analysis, is the higher level summary of what's actually going on, deleted activities, descriptions that changed. So this is a real nice report. You send it to the client, and then of course you got to review it both with the higher level management, and then if you got to talk to the scheduler, then you could review it in more detail and actually go into the fine details of the schedule and what you found, and go from there. Okay, in summary, don't reply just on the schedule log report. As I mentioned, I learned the lesson the hard way, and my boss came down on me. Anyone can do that, and after you take a day 2 of the Primavera training class, in the morning you learn how to run that schedule log report. Don't just run it and say this schedule is junk, because a lot of those activities may already been completed and they have no impact on the schedule. Leave no stone left unturned. Dig as deep as possible, so we can find out the real true story, and give a good report back to the client to make sure they can correct it and get good output moving forward. And then make sure you write the report that communicates across the different levels. Make sure you talk higher level management is more summary and higher level, and then of course down to the scheduler or the project manager who's actually going to go and fix the schedule. Make sure you go into the fine detail. So always communicate to different levels. And then next month, I'll be doing the next webinar on what's new in Primavera 16.1. You can join up on our newsletter and sign up for that. So that's going to be happening on June 22nd, 2016. So please feel free to sign up for that, and we'll show you all the new enhancements and features in P6 Pro, EPPM. There's enhancements in Team Member, so some really cool stuff that's in the newest version. And we're out of time, so Dan's going to get all the questions together, and we'll answer those questions, and we'll send them out once we get everything recorded and the PowerPoint set up, and we'll send that out to you. We have an upcoming event.
Some substantial questions asked today. We will make sure we answer every single one of those as part of the review. And some of the questions that were submitted were in regards to the POBS tables. As part of the follow-up, we will include our tech tip on how to remove the POBS tables from your P6 as well.
Yeah, that seems to be a bigger and bigger issue the more people I train and the more companies I go into to work with. So like I mentioned, there's a manual process, and then it looks like I've heard that there's automated processes. So it's going to drastically save time. So that's something you guys definitely want to clean up. So that's great. That's good that identified that there's issues out there. So, and then upcoming events, AAC International 2016 is up in Toronto, Canada. So if you can make it, that'd be great. We're going to all be up there, and you could join us and go experience great city of Toronto, Ontario. And I'll let you finish up, Dan.
All right, we appreciate everybody's time you took out of your day-to-day to join us for our webinar. We're going to put together all the materials and send a follow-up email. It will include a recording of the webinar, a copy of Bill's presentation. We will include that tech tip on removal of the POBS tables, and we'll also include a PDF of the outline of the scheduled narrative report that we put together for clients as well too. Kind of give you an example of how deep we actually dig to get into the schedule and find a lot of the variances that you don't see on the front side of it. But we'll put this together. We expect that to go out within about 24 hours. And again, we appreciate everyone taking their time and joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at next month's webinar on what's new in P6 16.1.